Alright folks, welcome back to Project Montero. Now that we have the cooling system functioning perfectly, we're going to switch gears and address the entire fuel delivery system. It's recently developed a bit of a rough idle and some hesitation upon acceleration. And remember, we found this Montero Sport out in a field and it had been sitting unrunning for a long time. So the theory here is that we sucked up some rust from the fuel tank and it's clogged up the fuel filter. So we're going to address that today. But before we do that, I want to get as much fuel out of the line as possible, so we are going to disconnect the relay that goes to the fuel pump. And that relay is found behind this panel on the floor of the passenger seat. Just start by popping these two tabs out with a screwdriver and you'll have access to the relay, which is right here. Just start the engine up and then disconnect that fuel pump relay, and the engine should be starved of fuel and turn off. At this point, the fuel line should be relatively empty and you shouldn't be able to start the vehicle. Now let's give ourselves some room to work by jacking it up. We'll need to jack it up on the driver's side because that's where we'll be doing all of our work today. And your fuel filter will be bolted to the frame right here, which is right behind the back seat on the driver's side. And it's actually kind of hard to get to with these ugly running boards, so let's just get rid of them. And I have plans to replace these with rock sliders anyway, so now's a good time. There's just a vertical bolt here and a horizontal nut there that hold each of the supports on. And now we'll have a much easier time accessing that fuel filter. I started by disconnecting the support bracket, but if I was doing this again, I would have done that last. As I applied torque to try and disconnect the fuel filter, it was just spinning, so I had to reconnect the support bracket in order to get the fuel filter out. The process for removing the filter is quite simple, but you need to be careful because the fuel line can be pretty fragile, so if it's rusted on there, you don't want to twist on it too hard. But for the input line, you just have to squeeze those two buttons there, and then the output is just that nut that you have to back out. And apologies, I wasn't able to get the camera mounted in a way to show you how I disconnected it, but once you have the old filter out, just go ahead and switch the support bracket over to the new filter. And then it's just a matter of doing everything you just did, but in reverse. And you can see here that the output line just screws directly into the filter. And when I was removing the filter, I just held the filter still with a 14mm wrench here, and then cranked hard on the fuel line with a 12mm wrench here. And the input line is really easy. You just press that connector on until you hear the click. And then you'll finish by reinstalling these two 12mm bolts that hold the support bracket onto the frame. And the torque spec on these is 2.5 ugga-duggas. And now that that new fuel filter is installed, let's go ahead and reconnect the relay for the fuel pump. With the relay reconnected, go ahead and turn the key to accessory mode for a few seconds and let that fuel pump start pumping the fuel, and then you can turn it over. And you might have to crank it once or twice to get the fuel all the way through the lines, but you should get ignition. And I didn't get any before footage of the hesitation and the idle, but before the engine would hesitate every few seconds and the needle on the tachometer would bounce around. But now you can see it is nice and smooth. And then we'll come out and check the status of the engine. And again, before you could kind of see the shudder and the shaking of the engine periodically, but now everything is running smooth, there's no shaking in the engine at all, and I think we've solved our problem. And before you finish, be sure to check for leaks too on that new filter that you installed. I didn't torque this down properly, and we do have a small leak, so I'll get that tightened up real quick. And we appear to be good to go now. And just out of curiosity, I decided to blow through the old filter to see how clogged it really was, and a bunch of nasty, rusted gasoline came out, and you can see the inside was completely packed with rust, and these giant pea-sized pebbles of rust came out the end the first time I blew, so it was definitely due for a change. It did its job. It caught all the rust from the rusty fuel tank, and now we have good flowing fuel. But unfortunately, that good flowing fuel did only last for a few days. We developed a misfire in cylinder 3, so my new theory is that we didn't actually catch all of the rust, and we knocked some loose that made it the rest of the way down the fuel line and clogged some injectors. So on the next episode, let's dig down to those injectors, replace those, and replace the spark plugs as well. We'll see you on the next one.